Welcome to the Frontlines of Leadership podcast, where my guests tell stories and share principles to inspire the rising generation of leaders. In today's episode, I'm excited to welcome Brandon Fish to the Frontlines of Leadership podcast. Brandon is a seasoned executive with more than 20 years of experience helping organizations accelerate growth through talent strategy, leadership, culture, and organizational development. He currently serves as Chief People Officer and Capital Strategist at VIAM, where he helps lead executive strategy, organizational scaling, capital initiatives, and people operations for one of the fastest growing companies in the renewable energy and tax equity industry. His career began in sales in 1999, where he discovered a passion for building meaningful relationships and recognized early the competitive advantage created by exceptional people and strong, values driven cultures. Throughout his career, Brandon has held executive leadership roles with several high growth organizations, including One on One Marketing, Domo, Entrata, LiveView Technologies, and now VIAM. He has played a key role in scaling organizations, attracting top talent, building high performing leadership teams, aligning people strategies with business objectives, and creating cultures where employees and companies thrive together. During his tenure at LVT, Brandon helped support a period of remarkable growth, contributing to revenue expansion from $17 million dollars to more than $200 million, dollars, while helping grow the organization by more than 500%. Today, he combines his background in executive leadership, organizational development, and capital strategy to help drive VM's continued expansion and long term vision. Originally from Arizona, Brandon earned a Bachelor of Science in Business from Brigham Young University. He is passionate about his faith, investing in his marriage and three adult children, and spending time outdoors biking, hiking, golfing, skiing, and enjoying the mountains. When he's not working, you'll likely find him cheering on his favorite sports teams, searching for the perfect donut, taking a well earned nap, or enjoying an ice cold Slurpee. Brandon, welcome to the front lines of leadership. Welcome to the Frontlines of Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Taylor, and I'm very excited to have Brandon Fish on the podcast. Brandon, thank you so much for being willing to join.
Of course, Jackson. Thank you. I'm excited about the opportunity and getting to chat a little bit today. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm super excited to interview Brandon and hear his insight. As many of you, if you've listened to other episodes, you know my focus on relationships and people and the importance of people in leadership. And Brandon spent a career working with people as a chief people officer or VP of human resources, whatever it might be at the companies he's been at. So he understands the importance of people in those relationships. So I'm super excited to hear his insight. And with that, we'll just jump into the first question, Brandon. Throughout your career in business, you've been at Domo, Entrata, LVT, and now VIAM, hyper growth companies, fast moving companies, companies that are very well known. In your experience, who's one of the greatest leaders you've had in your life, and what attributes did they possess and behaviors did they show you that made their leadership stand out to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It could be super loaded just because I've had the opportunity to what I would say a pleasure to jump around quite a bit here in what we call Silicon Slopes here in Utah along the Wasatch Front. And I went to my first startup. I kind of did the corporate route for a while for the first, I don't know, 8 or 10 years of my career, and didn't really love that. And so I transitioned and went to my first startup kind of in a people function back in 2008. And it's just kind of been, a downhill joyride from there because I finally really found my passion. Um, there's several leaders along the way, and probably just to keep them anonymous, I'll refer to, one of my companies instead of actually calling out the company. Just,
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know, maybe because if I do, that person, if it ever, they may get back to them or something. So I'll probably just speak, kind of openly about that. But really, I guess two people come to mind. First, I guess the first leader would be one of the founders actually at my third startup. They were about 300-ish employees. And, one of the founders there really trusted me long before they asked me to come work for them. I knew them through associations at BYU, where I went to college in the business school. I also knew them through just some social networks, but that individual actually offered me an opportunity, because up to that point I'd never been in any executive type roles. I'd just been
Mhm.
more individual contributor, whether it was in sales or recruiting or whatever. And this individual really just said, he invited me to come over to his house one night. It was a Sunday evening, and we literally sat on his couch for like 3 hours. And by the end of that, it was like midnight or 11 or midnight. He basically made me an offer, and he said, "I want you to come be my VP." And I don't know if physically my jaw dropped, but like inside it did. And because I had never been in that kind of a role before. And to be honest, it really kind of gave me a little bit of that. We hear the term imposter syndrome.
Right.
Um, and that happens a lot of times to people that are stepping into bigger opportunities.
Mhm.
And that happened to me. But the one thing I will forever be grateful for, uh, to him, is that he essentially saw something in me before I saw it in myself.
Mhm.
Um, and that has stuck with me forever. And we're friends to this day. I know I obviously no longer work there. I stayed there for a big chunk of my career, not quite a decade, but I was there for a while and had an incredible run. One thing, um, he told me, because it was a role that I was excited about, but there were people on that team that had more experience than me.
Right.
And he basically said, "I'm not hiring you because of your skill set in HR. I'm hiring you because of your ability to build culture. Because
Mhm.
I've seen what you've done at some of these other startups." And so I remember one time, those first few months, I was really kind of hesitant to make decisions. And he pulled me in his office one day and he said, "Hey, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Like, I hired you. You go with your gut, lean on your faith, whatever it is you do to get you to where you are now, keep doing that." And so that gave me a lot of confidence, I think. And so I really, really appreciate him. But I mentioned two people. I think the other person, and this person is not in business. It's actually my late father, who this year, I'm not celebrating, but we're coming up on his 10-year anniversary since he passed away.
Mhm.
But I think I'd have to say my dad, um, really has had an impact. He wasn't a business guy. In fact, he worked for the government his whole career,
Mhm.
and he didn't really teach us in the home how to be savvy and be business oriented. But looking back, when you ask me that question, like, who are leaders in my life, I would have to say my father, probably because he had the most incredible work ethic that I've ever seen. He would get me up on Saturday mornings to mow the lawn in Arizona, because before it got to 120 degrees, he'd get me out of bed, and he'd drip water in my face to wake me up, because I was a heavy sleeper, and I hated it. But looking back, I'm really grateful that he taught me how
Yeah.
to work. And he had a lot of integrity. I saw how he treated people. Everyone loved him because he was kind. Um, he kept his commitments to people, and that's kind of the way I wanted to be. And so, even though he wasn't a savvy business leader per se, he was a leader, a kind of a quiet, gentle giant leader. And so I would attribute, to be honest, a lot of my success and a lot of what I've done in my career to my dad. So
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing
anyway,
both of those people and those stories. I honestly love to hear people when they say their parents. It's not always you hear that. A lot of people, they come from, I've interviewed high-ranking military officials, business founders, executives, and I love to hear them say their parents. They're like humble enough to accept that, like, the people that were closest to them from the time they were a kid to where they are now, that's who made them. But
yeah.
I want to go back to the
Yeah.
first person you shared. You mentioned that this person had trust in you and had a relationship with you long before he even hired you. What did that do for your confidence to know coming in that one, you had the relationship with him, but also two, that you knew you had his trust, but also he told you that you had his trust. What did that do for your confidence as a leader to know that from him?
It was massive. I I would say, in addition to his confidence in me, well, his trust in me, to your point, it was just an instant confidence booster because, I don't think that I'm someone that lacks confidence, but I've never been like the most confident because I know that I'm typically not the smartest guy in the room or person in the room, right? But I I mean, that imposter syndrome was real. Like, I honestly was quite concerned about coming in and managing directors and managing other HR managers that had their, HR certifications and had all these things that up to that point in my life, I didn't have.
Hmm.
But him coming to me and saying, "Dude, don't worry. Like I want you to focus on culture." And so that's what I did. And I tried to not let, those other gaps in my experience get to me, even though sometimes it did. And so then I would research or I'd stay up late or I'd go take a class or a certification somewhere. But really knowing that he trusted me and then at any point I could go into his office and talk to him made it really comforting to me because, if to have a leader that tells you don't be afraid to make a mistake
Hmm.
is really reassuring because everybody in their job, we all fear mistakes because we don't want to lose our job or get fired or and I do think it was a little interesting because I think some of the people on the team were like, who is this guy that he's
Right.
hired? They
Yeah.
looked at my LinkedIn and saw really no background in HR other than recruiting, which is a huge passion of mine. And so, yeah, to answer your question, it really boosted my confidence, even when I still doubted myself a little bit in terms of the skill set in the day to day. But he told me, he's like, we've got a good team for that. And you can lean on those directors and those managers that know benefits, that know, the FMLA and all the government laws. And of course, over time, I learned those things. But initially, and at that company, we ended up quadrupling in size in my time there. We went up to about 1,200 people before I left.
Wow.
And I honestly think it was because of the culture that we built there, and that was by far my number one priority, was to
Yeah.
build a strong culture, to build company values that mattered. And so, yeah, I think hopefully that answers your question, but
No, for
that's the
sure.
biggest memory I think I have of that experience.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I think obviously the podcast being geared to inspiring the rising generation, I think a lot of people my age, younger, or even older too, have that imposter syndrome and they're gonna have whether they've had it already or not, they're gonna hopefully be put in positions where they're stretched or maybe their experience doesn't match the level of leadership that they're now being asked to take on. And so
Mhm.
the advice that you're giving to not be afraid to make mistakes is huge. I think on in any organization, whether that be your local softball team, a business, the military, a collegiate or professional sports team, if your people are afraid to make mistakes, they will only make more mistakes. They'll be timid,
That's right.
they'll play timid, they'll work timid, they'll be driven by fear. And so I think to just emphasize what Brandon's saying, if you have that feeling of lacking confidence or imposter syndrome, don't be afraid to make mistakes. And if your leader above you hasn't built a culture that's safe for you to make mistakes, talk to him about it. Try to build that yourself. And like Brandon's saying, help build that culture where people can make mistakes, learn from them, and grow. So thank you for sharing that, Brandon. I think that's super important
Yeah.
advice. Yeah.
Of course, of course. It's true. And I'll just add, leaders have to, I like there's a book called Leaders Eat Last.
I'm listening to
Um,
that right now.
are you really?
Yeah,
Oh,
Simon
it's a great,
Sinek. Yeah.
yep, yep. It's a great book. I love all of his books, but I think a lot of leaders try to rule with, kind of like the old school mentality of, an iron fist and intimidation and that doesn't work nowadays. And I could go into all the statistics. I'm a massive LinkedIn fan, and so I've actually been on panels with the LinkedIn VPs of why people leave jobs, why they stick around, and there these younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, and there's other opportunities. And so if you're gonna lead, through intimidation and other things, that's not going to work. And your best
Mhm.
people are going to go where they enjoy and they're being there and they're comfortable. So not only as an individual becoming a leader, but if leaders are listening to this, I would suggest, give your team a little bit of rope. Like I always
Mhm.
say, give them a little bit of rope. Don't pull that rope tight. Just give them a little slack to help let them go make decisions, guide them. Of course, you don't want them to make catastrophic like budget financial
Right,
mistakes,
right.
but typically they're not going to be in those types of roles anyway. But let them learn and then be kind. And what I mean by that is don't just be nice, but be kind in telling them constructively, constructive criticism, not a beat down or something like that. So anyway, it's important both ways, I think,
Yeah.
as a leader and as the employee moving up into that role, hopefully someday. So
Yeah, the analogy I was told in the role that I'm in now, my leader came to me and said, I want you to act like you're a very nice sports car and go as fast and as hard as you can and like bump it up, scratch the car up, but last thing, just don't crash it, but go as fast as you can, make mistakes, get the bumps and the scratches, and then I'll help you make sure you don't crash it, don't make any catastrophic mistakes, but go fast
yeah,
and make those mistakes so you can learn. So I think that's a
I
very
love it.
important principle. Thank you. But we'll move
Yeah,
on
I
to the
love
next
that.
question. Brandon, you've kind of touched on obviously, and I think reading between the lines, you can tell how important people are and kind of your leadership style in that. But I'd love for you to take the opportunity. You've talked about two leaders in your life, that one at that startup you were at, and then your dad. I'm sure you've learned from other great leaders too. But as you've learned from those leaders in your life, and now you having the opportunity to lead in your career, what's your personal philosophy? What do you stand on as a leader? When someone asks you, like, how do you lead and what's your personal philosophy? What's what kind of drives you, makes you tick as a leader?
Yeah, I love that question, Jackson, because it really just speaks to my heart and really speaks to who I am as a person. And I think I'll answer the question, but before I do, I think the reason I ultimately ended up where I'm at is it wasn't by choice. I never would have thought out of business school and college that I would have gone into people operations. I was like a sales and marketing and kind of a gregarious like extrovert and I started in that and realized I didn't like it because in sales you've got quotas and it's high
Right.
pressure and I realized, man, I like people and I don't want to try to sell something to this person that they don't really need or you know have them place a bigger order than they need. I worked for a couple
Yeah.
different industries, but I ultimately realized that I needed to work more with people because I have such a passion for people. But again, I'm going to go back to that leader that saw something in me that I didn't quite yet see in myself, which from that point on, and that's been now, not quite 15 years ago. Um, there's a couple different ways I want to answer your question because I think this maybe not be my philosophy yet, but I believe that business is ultimately about people,
Mhm.
and people build the culture, and culture is what builds companies. And so I think companies, and one reason why I have left the companies that I've grown is because inevitably successful companies get to the point where they do turn more corporate. There's
Yeah.
there it gets to the point where there's a little bit of politics and not all companies. There are large companies, the large finance companies and Google and Apple and some of these companies we hear about that have great cultures, but a lot of times that they lose that culture when they grow. And so that's why I've enjoyed jumping back most of my career. I typically grow a company and then I go back to the startup phase because I really like establishing that baseline of building it's really about people.
Mhm.
But if you're just asking me like what's my philosophy, I would probably say, you know, uh, love love the people, tell them the truth, and build something worth believing in. Um, I've always said I don't care if I'm selling, you know, toilet paper or golf clubs, because I love golfing, and I would
Me
I would
too.
love to go work for Ping or Titleist, or I'm a Ping guy, but I don't care if I'm working for Kleenex. If you build the right culture, it doesn't matter what the product is. You can build a place that's really fun to work and where people get excited to come to work instead of, I've always said this in my career, I want to build a place that when those employees, when their alarm goes off in the morning, they're excited to go to work instead of getting that pit in their stomach, like, oh my gosh, stress, I got to go to work, my manager's going to be all over me. And so, building that, that's kind of my own personal philosophy. It is that is, if you love the people and you be honest with them and tell them the truth, you don't need to be rude, but just be kind. Um, it helps to build something worth believing in. And if you build and hire right, it's going to be a place where people want to work. And so I think, get to know, when I say love the people, what I mean by that is like get to know their spouse or their roommates or their children. uh Find out what they love to do, know what their dreams are, and celebrate, if they have a kid that gets baptized or wins the soccer team championship, like celebrate that, be interested in them, sit with them. I mean, I've had employees in my office in tears, whether it was a breakup with a boyfriend or a divorce, some really heavy things. Folks with cancer that have been in my
Yeah.
office, right in front of me, in tears, saying they have terminal cancer. And in that moment, work doesn't matter. It,
Right.
it's their relationship, it's them as a person. And I think as long as you're, you know, true, as long as you're open with them, and like I said, tell the truth. Don't be too harsh. Love. I think love without truth isn't leadership. Um, so you do need, I think love and truth kind of have to commingle, and you have to learn how to do both. But ultimately, my passion with my philosophy is, it's really, I would say it's a handful of things. It's what's the mission of the company, what are the values, which I love going into companies and helping them create their company values. What's the purpose? What's the culture? Because culture isn't what people think it is. Sometimes it's not about ping pong tables and pizza.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you treat people? How do how does the executive team, how do they treat their people? Because that's the culture that's established. It's not all the frills and the extras that companies feel like they have to do. Free soda, whatever. Um, and so my philosophy is, look, I try to go to companies and say my job isn't really to build followers, it's to build leaders. And I think one thing that's helped me do that, and then I'll stop because it's a long answer, but I've mentioned a couple times like my faith, and I think I'm a Christian, and my faith has taught me that every person, I don't care if what they believe, or if they don't believe. To me, and of course in HR, you have to be equal and treat everybody respectfully, which I love, because I don't care your color, race, origin, gender, doesn't matter. But I think every person has divine worth. I do. And if I actually believe that on Sunday when I go to church, then I ought to believe it on Monday morning when I walk into the office. And I want the people I work with to know that they matter. And so I do believe that leadership isn't, it's not about being the most important person in the room. It's really about helping other people uh, discover or learn that they actually matter. And that to me is kind of my whole. Sorry, that was a long answer, but you can tell I'm passionate about this stuff,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, you can tell the way you light up, the way your voice is, like that's what you care about. And you definitely not only are saying that you love the people, but I can tell that you actually show that and those people respect you. And you already answered. I was gonna ask a follow-up question about like how do you actually show that? And you kind of answered that already. And I think it's important to understand. I think a lot of people think you talk about the word love in a business setting, it's kind of some people think it's taboo and relationships shouldn't be that close in work and things. And obviously there's lines and boundaries for that, but like a leader who truly inspires someone, like you're saying, the leader doesn't need to be the most important person in the room. The leader that makes his or her team feel like the most important person is really the greatest leader, not the loudest, not even the most charismatic, but the one who can help them feel and achieve their greatness that's already inside of them. So I think I believe in that too, that whole philosophy you shared, knowing your mission, your values, and ultimately focusing on, you said the people build the culture and then the culture builds the company. I think that's
Yeah.
that's an amazing line and a one-liner to know, like it always starts with the people you hire and how you build them, and then ultimately that's what's going to run the company, because obviously you need people to run a company and to build it and to have that culture there that's set. So thanks for sharing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you said something that sparked just one, if you don't mind, just
No, go for it.
one other thought. Culture to me is king. There's another book I read that culture eats something for breakfast. What is that book? Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast, I think is the
Okay.
name of the book. A lot of people will probably disagree with me, and there's probably certain types of businesses where that may not be the case. Like maybe at one of the big four accounting firms where it's super cutthroat, or
Right.
doing private equity on Wall Street, or venture cap, where it's just like strategic. But
Uh-huh.
most companies aren't that way. And I think, I culture is kind of my wheelhouse. It's not even intentional. It's just because of it's like who I am. And
Yeah.
I believe to my core that companies don't accidentally build great cultures. It takes a lot of intention,
Hmm.
but they accidentally build bad ones.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the problem. If you don't pay attention and are intentional about building a good culture, you can build a bad one really fast. And
Mhm.
I think I mentioned it before. It's not about the hoodies and the swag and all that stuff. It's what are you rewarding at the company, and what gets tolerated. What are you allowing to have happen and not happen, and then what do the leaders model? What do the leaders at the company model? Do they support the executive team, or are they always bashing them and saying, "Oh, can you believe that the CEO wants us to do this?" Like, there's got to be a cascade of culture from the boardroom to the entry level, whatever, what if it assembly line, whatever, and that's kind of like a mic drop moment, I think, for leaders, that they need to really understand that, because if not, a bad culture. And I've worked at companies that have had bad cultures, and I've not stayed there very long, because it's like you're going opposite of what you hired me to do. And
Right.
so it's not, again, I think it comes back to those relationships. And I'll say this, and I don't know if you were going to ask this in the future, but people typically don't leave companies if the culture is strong. They they usually leave their manager, um, or they leave because they stopped feeling seen, or occasionally they'll leave, or obviously if they get a great offer somewhere, and because
Right.
money does talk, but it's not
Mhm.
everything. And so I think first, I think people leave companies because of their manager more than the actual company. But if the culture is great, sometimes it makes it hard to leave, even if you don't like your manager, because and I've seen that too. So anyway, just another thought that I would add there.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I agree. Like, obviously, if there's great offers that come or whatever it is, but people, great companies, a good sign of a great company, in my opinion, is one where people don't want to leave. They want to, and like you said, when they wake up, they're excited to go to work. They're not waking up dreading going into the office to see their boss or whatever it is. So I think you're definitely right there. And yeah, I've had that experience in my own work. Like, even if you may not like your team or your leader or whatever it is, the company's great. So you find your way to continue to be there. And then honestly, like vice versa, I've had experiences where maybe the culture wasn't good, but I had a great leader, which helped me stick around and because of that personal relationship. But no, I think you're right. The culture is super important and it comes from the people.
Yeah, yeah,
One thing you mentioned in the previous question, you talked about and this wasn't one I was planning on asking, but you talked about something you love to do is go into a company and help them understand and build their values. I'm just curious kind of what that looks like when you go in, and is it, a series of questions you're asking the executives? Is it, going to shadow the individual work contributors to know, what they're doing? But what does that actually look like to go into a company and help them understand their values first to set them and then also to maintain them?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that question. Man, I could do the whole podcast just on this because you kind of struck a chord. So years ago, I read a book. Uh, the author is Ann Rhodes. And it's funny because I've mentioned now 3 books. Honestly, I'm not a huge. I love to read, but I'm not a huge reader because I'm just always. I've got so many things going on in my life. Even though I'm an empty nester now, I'm still
Yeah.
very involved. And but the books that I do read that leave a lasting impression, I'll always talk about them. And the book that this author Ann Rhodes wrote, it's called Built on Values. And
Okay.
she essentially the entire book is to teach executive teams or to teach, people operations or HR teams how to establish values at a company. Because most companies, I think we all know companies that, it's just a plaque on the wall that says, we lead with integrity. We are
Right.
loyal to our customer. Those are great, but those are boring. And
Mhm.
you want to create values that tell a story. So what I like to do, and what the book talks about, um, is, and I just did this with my current company, and we're actually still working on them, so they're not finalized. But what what I like to do is you take the leadership team, and hopefully the founders. Most of the companies I've joined, the founders are still heavily involved,
Yeah.
and so ideally is you go on like a retreat. And so what we did is we went down. I live close to Salt Lake City. We went down to St. George, which is kind of close to Las Vegas, and we went to a nice house and went to this retreat for a couple of days off site. So
Hmm.
we were out of the office. We weren't focused on work, and the way I facilitated that part of our offsite was, let's start with the stories that built this company. And one of the, I think I talked to you earlier about the name of our company. Well, it's a Latin term for making our own way. And so I thought, well, that's got to be embedded in our values.
Right.
Instead of just picking a word from a book that sounds good, create values that actually are the makeup of what got the company to where they are now. And so, like one of the values at one of the companies that I worked for, instead of just listing it as, we're good communicators. If you've ever seen the movie Top Gun, and I'm dating
Yeah.
myself here, the original Top Gun, Maverick says when they're up in the air and his flight partner is Goose, and he says, "Talk to me, Goose. Like I need you to talk to me." That was one of our values because we knew communication was important. So we kind of modeled our values after movie quotes. And
Wow. Yeah.
one of them, the other one was "Be excellent to each other" from the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And so if you see what I'm saying, you try to get in with the company, get the founders, get the decision makers, the executives, the leaders, and really ask the questions to get them thinking about what got you to where we are today. And those are the trick is coming up with the one liner to actually match, the
Yeah.
story. But it
Right.
usually flows. And once you kind of start discussing it, it usually flows, and it comes. And I would suggest 4 or 5 values is good. And in that book, it says, hey, if a couple years down the road you feel like you've gotten really good and the company's mastered that particular value, go create a new one. Because within that last few years, there's probably been a new challenge or something that's come up that could help, define a new value, and so you can change those. And so that's really kind of what I do is go in and have a session or two. Ideally, they can read the book. If not, I'll kind of walk through the exercise in kind of an abridged version of because I've done it enough now. I've done it now at 3 different companies where we've actually gone from A to Z on creating, going from no values to having a full, corporate values system with supporting statements on what they mean. And
Yeah.
it's a big exercise, but it's really fun for me to do because it makes it exciting, and it helps you really tailor the business to those values. And every decision, you should hire people based on those values. um, I like to, and I know hiring was one of the things that we were maybe going to talk about, but I'd like to weave values based questions, and it's called behavioral interviewing. Instead of just yes no, you want to get them talking. I
Yeah.
like to use our company values and actually form questions around those values to see their answers, if they'd be a good fit. Because
So
some
smart.
people, all they do is care about strategy, and they don't really want to come in and be creative. And that strategic person might be smarter and they might be better on paper, but you'd probably rather hire the person that's still competent, but it's a better culture fit. Because
Hmm.
I think in the long run, that's going to help the company be more successful. So anyway, again, a long answer, but I really love this stuff, and I'm passionate about it. So
Yeah, and I think it's important. I was going to ask, but you just answered it. I was going to ask, how do you implement that? Like you come up with it at the offsite with the executives, and then ultimately it has to go down, like you said, to the most entry-level person, whether that be an entry-level analyst or the assembly line on the factory floor, whatever it is. And you're saying every decision that the company makes, whether that's hiring someone, whether that's closing a deal or partnering with another company, whatever it is, comes down based on those values. And I think
it
that's
does.
important for a company to have that and make those decisions based on that, but also for individuals. I'm kind of in with the podcast ultimately led to me being in the leadership development space. And a lot of leadership development companies, one of the things they do when they do these sessions with leaders, whether that's a workshop with a company or one-on-one, they help them come up with their personal values. And then they teach them that every decision you make from this point on is based on these values because this is your identity. And so I think that's
Yes.
important for an organization, but also for individuals and leaders to know this is who I am. I have a leadership identity. And honestly, it makes those decisions easier down the line when you know that you're always going to be honest or you're always going to work with integrity. The question to, make a sleazy sale or to, whatever it might be, you already have the answer because you know what you're stuck to, both for a company and individual. So I think that's a great exercise. And honestly, if I was listening, I would go do that for myself. You just
Yeah.
talked about that book, reading that book, or going through that process for your own company if you lead a company or for yourself individually. So I just think that's super important principles as well. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you bet. And the follow-up to that would be, typically the way you'd roll it out is you'd have an all hands company meeting. You'd have some really cool slides to introduce each value, and hopefully you've got your graphic designer that's kind of built,
Right.
kind of a cool, like the talk to me goose. We had a goose, but we also had it kind of be like in an F-15 or something from Top
Nice.
Gun, and just kind of creating some fun things around it. And then of course, making some swag, whether it's a cool t-shirt that has, or a hat, or because your employees like that stuff. I don't think you should focus on that, but it's a nice, and to be honest, one of the first companies we did that, and we would do t-shirts for all these different values. And the coolest thing ever is going out to, like, on a weekend on a date with my wife and seeing a t-shirt that
Yeah.
says "Talk to me, Goose," at the movie, and it's like, man, that's awesome. They're proud to wear that out in the public. Now, not only is it good marketing for the company,
Right.
but it says a lot that they're proud of where they work, and they love the values, and they're, I'm a proponent of create company values that don't just work at your employment, but they're things that you want to implement into your own life,
Hmm.
in your home. The values that'll make me a better husband and father and friend and sibling and someday grandparent. And so I've tried to always remember all the values for the places I've worked, because they're important. And I think they're not only important Monday through Friday from 8 to 6 or whatever your schedule is, but they're important all throughout the week. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, good stuff.
No, I think that's important to live it, not just at work, but every day of the week. That's cool. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for your advice and stories so far. I've got two more questions for you, if that's all right.
Of course. Yeah. I
And I'm
love
sure
it,
I'll
man.
have
It's good
follow-ups
stuff.
on those. But
I feel like we're just getting started, so let's go.
I know. So one of the questions I have, like I said, this being focused on inspiring the rising generation, there might be people listening that maybe don't necessarily have a formal leadership role. They may not have that like actual company like authority to be in that role, like a manager or director or whatever it is. How can someone who's in one of those positions who how can they prepare to ultimately accept that position in the future when they have the opportunity, but also be a leader now despite not having necessarily that formal role or influence?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I love this question because a lot of a lot of us feel like that we can't be leaders if we're not in management roles. And um, there's a lot of there's a big difference. And you mentioned leadership development. One of the companies I was at, I was tasked with building and creating a leadership development program to help identify our future leaders at the company. And we actually tried to put people through the program that weren't in management, because the idea is to find people that are going to be the future leaders of the company. And so the way I'll answer this is, one of my favorite quotes, because I love leadership. And, leadership to me, it begins the moment you decide to take ownership. And not when someone gives you direct reports or they make you a manager, or in my case, in that story in the beginning, that I went from being a individual contributor who'd never, well, I'd managed people when I was younger, like early in my career, but I don't really count that. Like post college, I went from being an individual contributor to a VP. And I didn't become a leader in that moment. I was given that title because my friend saw those qualities in me as an individual contributor at another company. Because if you think about it, like anybody can go solve problems. Anybody, can, go really dive deep into a spreadsheet and create policy and all that stuff. But not everybody knows how to lift others,
Hmm.
to be the first to volunteer when your team's asked to do something, to bring the energy, to be accountable for something that the company, a deadline, or keeping commitments, being trustworthy. And those are things that don't aren't required to be a manager. And so to me, being a manager and a leader are two completely different things. Being a manager is someone that makes sure that the tasks are getting done so they can report up. A leader is someone that shows people how to get it done. And
Hmm.
so, I think the people who eventually become leaders are usually leading long before anyone gives them permission,
Yeah.
or makes them like, okay, you've done really good in this role, now we're going to make you the manager of that team. I have found a lot of times in my career that just because they were really good as an individual contributor, they might be a horrible manager.
Yeah.
um, and a lot of times companies make that mistake, and they put the person that performs better into the role instead of a person that's a good leader into the role,
Hmm.
because
Right.
those are two very different things. And so, yeah, I just think that's really critical, and I think you can become a leader. I mean, I think you or anybody listening to this, whether it's in your personal life or social circles, if you've been on sports, I'm a huge sports fan, so I like to have sports analogies, but it's not always the quarterback or the coach that's the leader. Sometimes it's, you know, the smallest guy on the defense that just has the ability to get people excited and get them
Hmm.
pumped up. That kid's a leader, and he's not the leading scorer, he's not the quarterback, he's not the coach, but people listen to him because he has the energy and he
Yeah.
has those elements that people want to follow, and he lifts others up, or he or she. So anyway, I think that's really important when you talk about leadership.
Yeah. Something you said reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from a book called Trust and Inspire by Stephen Covey, the son
Mm,
of the second Stephen Covey. He says, systems are meant to be managed and people are meant to be led and inspired. And
mm,
I think whether that's the software you use or the processes you go through for whatever it is to actually like, do the work, those things are meant to be managed. People are not meant to be managed. They're meant to be inspired. And I think people, whether they're in a leadership role and they have manager or director or VP in their title, yeah, I think those titles are meant to be respected for sure. But the people that lead long before they're ever given that title are the people that people are drawn to, the people they trust anyways. You talk about sports analogies the like the captains of any football team are usually chosen by the players themselves, and that's who they're
That's
drawn
right.
to and who they trust. And so I think that's an important principle for rising generation to know. You don't have to have the official role on your ADP or HR book to be a leader, to set an example, to see a standard and hold that standard, whatever it is. So I think that's important. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's fun stuff to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more question as we wrap up here. Again, Brandon, I'm super grateful for your advice, your insight, your stories, and hopefully the audience is as well. I think this is why I started the podcast. I love to hear real stories and real advice from real leaders. So thank you for being on. And the question I want to ask is, I know in the last few years, you've been executive level, VP and up, now Chief People Officer. So you're kind of in the boardroom, in the executive room. But as you look back on your life and you look back to when you were younger and you think of the young people today, young leaders today, what do you think, what advice would you give them? And maybe this comes to what advice you would give yourself if you looked back on your younger self. Like, what advice would you give them to become the best leader they can be today?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a good question, and that one really kind of forces me to dig deep because I think, I come from a lot older generation. I'm a Gen X guy. I was born in the early '70s, and so uh, one thing I have seen is that my peers typically tend to be quite critical of, you know, I remember when it was the millennials. Oh, I can't believe these millennials. They're coming into the workforce, and that, the thing I heard the most was, "Oh, kids these days." Like,
Right.
and I've just never I've never thought of it that way because I love the things that these younger generations are focused on and they're good at. And so one thing I would say, and then I'll follow it up with a couple of things that I think are important that I've recognized in this younger generation. And I've tried to adapt because look, like I said earlier in the podcast, my my goal as a leader is to never be the smartest guy in the room. I want to surround myself with people that my leadership style, and if you talk to anybody that I've ever managed, is that I am not a micromanager. These younger generations don't want to be micromanaged. They want to have some freedom. And I think our generation of the older generation of people that are probably now in the boardroom are a little harsh because we try to lead and manage the way that we were brought up. And that doesn't work now. And
Right.
so I think we've talked about it a little bit today. And I think this is something good to remember that, confidence is wonderful, but confidence without humility becomes arrogance.
Yeah.
And I remember I heard that somewhere, and I think it's good for all of us to be confident. And I would urge, I think one thing that happens with these younger generations is I don't think that they're arrogant, but because they're confident, they might come across as being arrogant. But I would recommend, you know, gain confidence, but be humble.
Hmm.
And because nobody wants to be in the boardroom with that lady or man that is just like the power hungry, slamming their fist, that
Yeah.
they're arrogant and they know it and everybody else knows it. I think these younger generations of people now entering the workforce, or if you're early in your career, focus on things that you do well. Um, and when I say that, this generation can run circles around me when it comes to technology. I'm trying to train myself right now on becoming better at using AI, because it's
Mhm.
like, man, we never grew up with that stuff. I remember
Right.
hearing artificial intelligence when I was younger, and it was like something that would happen in like 200 years, but it's here and we have to
Yeah.
embrace it. And so, leaders, young or old, they have to be adaptable. If I don't start learning that stuff, I'm going to get passed by. And just because I'm older and I've got the experience, someone that understands the tools better may replace me pretty soon if I'm not staying up on it. Um, and so I think, those are things. I think I'm speaking to the younger and the older, because I think the older generation needs to be a little more lenient and understand what these younger generations, how they think, how they like to work. I mean, if I hire someone remote, COVID changed everything. I'd never worked remote before COVID. Right now, I'm remote because we're in between offices, and I've had to learn how to do that. And I think embracing that. If I have someone on my team that gets their work done in 5 hours, where the old school mentality is, if you're not putting in 8 hours, you're cheating the
Yeah.
company. Well, dude, if you're getting your work done in 5 hours, go have fun. Go to your kid's soccer game, or go to a
Yeah.
movie with your wife or whatever, and be adaptable. And so I think those things, as a younger person, maybe earlier in their career, I would make sure you're very purpose driven, uh, that you are collaborative, because older generations, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have technology, so we like to actually, if I need something done, I'm going to stand up and walk down the hall and talk face to face with somebody. I'm not going to text them. So it's important to stretch yourself a little bit. One of the things I think this younger generation is really good at is they're very creative. uh, they're very savvy with technology and all the things. One thing I would not caution, but that I would offer up that's important is be open to feedback. Um, because whether you're young or old, you're not the only person in the room, and there's a lot of other people that have great ideas. And that's one thing I like about diversity is you get diversity of thought, you get diversity of opinions, you get
Mhm.
diversity of strategy. And so I think being open to that. um, and another thing, I see this in my own kids, because I have Gen Z. Well, my oldest is probably on the tail end of being a millennial. And then, I've got the Gen Z, and now what is it, Gen Y or Alpha that's coming up? I don't know. But
Yeah, something.
some areas where I see, and this isn't being critical, but here's some areas where I see some of them struggle is, uh, you know, maybe lacking a little patience. And what I mean by that is, and here we go. Now I'm saying kids these days, but it's taken me years and years, and if not decades, to get where my parents were. And younger folks want to be graduating from college and have the nice car, have the nice house, and if that works out and you can do it, great. But it takes time. I mean, we all know how expensive homes are, and so be patient. I would also say learn how to be resilient, because companies are changing fast. And if you're not resilient and willing and able to pivot quickly, that you can get kind of left behind. Another one is handling conflict, not only learning how to do it, but being okay with it and don't take it personal, which is something earlier in my career that I did. And I kind of like went home and felt bad about myself. But learn how to have difficult conversations, but yet be able to walk out and high five each other or give each other a hug and not be offended. Um, and then I don't know if this is the ending thing, but I've always coached people in my career. I've given back to the university, and I'll go help mentor the graduates with building their resume. And
Mhm.
kids will ask me all the time, well, how do you know, if you don't know what you want to do, how do you know what job to go after? And
Yeah.
I and it's funny because I didn't do this until going back to that manager that hired me, that saw something in myself that I didn't see, is find something that you're really good at and that you like, that you love. Because if you if you go into something that you enjoy and you love it, you're eventually going to master it. And so I would say stick with it long enough to master it. So then somebody is willing to pay you for being really good at those things because you've become a master. You're not like what is it, the jack of all trades, but master of none.
Yeah.
I think this generation, unlike previous generations where we kind of had to know a little bit of everything, I think that's different. I think AI is changing that. So if you become really good at a couple of things, I think you can build a career off of that. And and then I would just say, and I know we're probably over time, but I think you got to have fun. Bring some humor into the workplace. Let people see your personality. I One of the funniest questions I ask people, and well, I used to ask. I don't interview as much anymore because I have a team to do that. But I like talking about personal things. I particularly myself, I love donuts, and here in Utah, there's tons of donut shops. And
Yeah.
one of the questions, and it was kind of a trick question because I would ask it, and I think they thought that it meant something more than it did. But I would straight up at the end of the interview ask, "What is your favorite donut?" And people would. I mean, I had one guy start to sweat because I think he was worried that he wasn't going to answer it the right way.
Yeah.
That question had nothing. There was no ulterior motive. I just wanted to see their personality.
Yeah.
And some people would say, "Oh, I love the little cheap Hostess donuts," and some would say, "Oh, I love the gourmet donuts from Lehigh Bakery," and all the different things. So try to have fun. Don't take things too serious. Incorporate your personal life as much as you can. I've made enough leadership mistakes that I probably ought to write a book, titled "Everything That I Learned the Hard Way." I'm still learning, and I probably will write a book someday. But I think it's just lean into it. Whatever you're doing, lean into it. You'll know sooner than later if you like it.
Mhm.
If you don't, it's okay. Like go get back out there and find something that you're passionate about and that you enjoy. Because if you do, then it's not a job. It's a career, and it's something you enjoy. Because we can all go punch a clock and have a job that we've all had, those jobs that we don't love, but find something that you love and that you're passionate about. Because if you do, you're going to have a lot more enjoyment in your career than a lot of people. So
Yeah.
you
Well,
know
thank you for sharing all that advice. I can pinpoint several things. One being patient that I struggle with. Like I struggle with being patient. I want to take action. I want the things to happen now. And it's good to hear that advice from you to take a step back, let things come to you, do the right things and take the right steps, but let it come. So there's several things you said that I think is great advice to the audience, for the rising generation, younger generation, but also for me personally. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much again, Brandon, for coming on the podcast. I've got one last question and then we'll wrap up. And it's just, what's your favorite donut?
there we go. I actually I mentioned Lehigh Bakery. I don't know. It's Lehigh is a town between where I live and Salt Lake City, and
Hmm.
they call themselves the inventors of the square donut. And it's literally, picture a Krispy Kreme donut, but it's in a square. And it's
Okay.
not, Krispy Kremes are like, they're super rich. I can eat like one of them, and then I'm like, I can't do another one. The Lehigh donut, there's a little more to it, but it's super soft. Honestly, I could probably throw down a dozen of them, and they're so good, especially like the next day you throw it in the microwave for like 9.5 seconds and it's just perfect.
You've got it to
Um,
the hundredth of a
oh,
second.
oh, oh, yeah. So I used to actually go get those on Fridays. I'd buy a couple dozen or whatever because it was close to Lehigh, is where kind of the hub for Silicon Slopes is here in Utah. So
Yeah.
a lot of companies I've worked for are up there. So I'd go grab, a dozen or two and bring them in the office. And man, they didn't last but a few minutes, and it's just a plain glazed donut. There's not much
Sounds
to it, but
amazing.
it's way better than Krispy Kreme, but not as like, airy as some of your grocery store donuts that you buy that just aren't as good. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, that's I'm glad you asked that question because I love donuts and I love Coke Slurpees. And so
There you
I'm
go.
not afraid to introduce either one of those in my interviews to make people feel a little uncomfortable, but hopefully lighten the mood a
Yeah.
little bit too. So
Well, anyone listening, if you're in Utah or make your way through Utah, go to Lehigh Bakery. I feel like a lot of people will be offended since the answer wasn't a BYU Cougar tail at a football game, but that's
dude,
also
I love a cougar tail. So my second favorite donut is a maple bar, and it's the
yeah,
one at BYU, the cougar tail. The
yeah,
problem is those are like 18 inches long, and
yeah,
I can't eat a full one. But that's a close second. So you
yeah,
nailed
yeah,
it for sure.
yeah.
For,
Well,
yeah,
Brandon, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Seriously, your insight was awesome and super inspiring.
you bet, Jackson. Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time and love to talk about things I'm passionate about. So thank you.
Thank you for spending time with us on the Front Lines of Leadership podcast. Leadership isn't about the position you hold. It's about the responsibility you accept and the people you serve. Take a moment to reflect on one principle from today's conversation that you can apply immediately, at work, at home, or in your community. Small, intentional actions compound into real leadership. Subscribe, share, and join us again as we continue to learn from leaders who show us what it means to lead from the front lines.